Hey everyone, Gary Simon here, and welcome to this brand new 100% free course and crash course really on RxJS. So RxJS is the JavaScript implementation of ReactiveX. Well, what is ReactiveX? It's an API for asynchronous programming with observable streams. If you've never heard of or never messed around with this before, that probably means nothing to you as well. What the hell is that? That's okay though, because I'm going to show you exactly from scratch what all of this stuff means. And so at reactivex.io, which is the official website for it, we can see we have our languages, Java, JavaScript, which is what we're going to be focusing on, .NET, Scala, etc. So if we go to /RxJS, we'll have the official documentation for ReactiveX library. And we will be referring to this, especially when it comes to understanding what are called marble diagrams. And you'll understand that stuff very soon as we go through it throughout this crash course. So there's also a written version of pretty much everything I'm teaching here. Feel free to check that out. It's linked. And let's get started. Okay, so we're going to get started by setting up a quick development environment so that we can start learning RxJS. And there are frameworks like Angular that already have it integrated, but for this series of tutorials or this course, I really wanted to make it framework agnostic. We're just going to be working within pure vanilla JavaScript, and we're not going to be choosing any frameworks. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and go to the console. All right, so we're just going to create a new folder called RxJS and -learn, and then we'll also cd into it. So cd RxJS-learn. All right. And I'm going to use Yarn for this, although you could use npm, the node package manager, for installing the necessary project dependencies. So I'm just going to type yarn init and -y. That'll create a package JSON file with all of the answers being yes for that. So then we're going to use Yarn to add RxJS itself, and then Webpack, which we'll use to bundle everything together, and then also TypeScript, although you don't have to use TypeScript in order to use RxJS, but eventually I'm going to be leading into Angular, so might as well just get used to some TypeScript. All right, so then Yarn add RxJS, Webpack -dev-server. This will launch a dev server for us on localhost 8080 by default, and then also TypeScript and TS or TypeScript loader. All right, so I'm just going to wait until this installs. All right, and then finally, we're going to add as a development dependency in our package JSON file a package called Webpack-CLI. Yarn add Webpack -CLI, and then we add the dev flag. All right, great. So now I'm just going to go ahead and clear this out and type in code and a period. This will launch Visual Studio Code if you haven't installed from the command line in our current RxJS learn folder. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is open up the package JSON file, and let me make this a little bit larger so everybody can see what's happening here. And inside of here, we just want to add a new property called scripts. So scripts, and we're going to open this up, and we'll say start. So when we run a command called yarn run, well, what's it called? Start. We'll upgrade later there. And what command do we want to be run when we call start? It'll be webpack dev server. And then also we're going to add a mode development here. If you just, I was running Webpack dev server itself, and the output mentioned that I need to specify a mode here. That's why I'm adding that here. All right, and then a comma at the end, save that. So now we need to set up Webpack itself. So we're going to create a file here called webpack.config.js. By the way, everything I'm doing right now in terms of the code, if you don't want to follow along, you can grab the GitHub code. There's a link here provided, and also all the codes in the written version of this tutorial, which is also linked here. Okay, so really at this point, I'm just going to copy from the written tutorial this section right here. Again, this is all linked. So I'm just going to copy all of this because I'm not going to go through all of this, this configuration setup, simply because it's not relevant to the purpose of this course. All right, so the only thing that's really happening here that is worth mentioning is that our entry point is going to be looking at this this folder in a file called code.ts, which is for TypeScript. That's where all of our code is going to be throughout pretty much the duration of this course to learn RxJS. All right, and then of course the extensions that we're using, TS for TypeScript, JavaScript, any testing, we're not going to be doing that. And then it just bundles everything to a bundle.js and into a path of the dist folder. All right. All right, then we want to create another file for TypeScript. So it's going to be tsconfig.json. And once again, I'll be copying the code for that. And this is the code for that. It's just specifying our output of dist. We're able to use the ES 2017, otherwise known as ES8 JavaScript, while compiling down to 2015 or ES6 right here. So we'll save both of these files. All right, and then we need to create our index.html. All right, and here in Visual Studio Code, you just put a exclamation point and hit enter. That gives us some basic boilerplate. Hit Control B to get rid of that sidebar. And also in the written version of the tutorial, I do have a couple adjustments I made to this basic document. For instance, I'm going to change this document here, the title. I'm also going to add just some 3 CSS rule sets right here. Again, I'm grabbing all of this from the written version. And then for our body, we're going to have a single unordered list element with an ID of output. And then outside of here, we're going to have our script source equals /bundle.js. All right, so this ID of output right here, we're going to be using that to display the output of our observables while we're learning RxJS. We could have just console log it, but I think that looks ugly. It's a lot easier just to have something that's kind of styled and it looks well in the browser for us. So that's the purpose of this unordered list element. Again, it's not necessary, but it'll make life a little bit easier and prettier. So let's go ahead now and create that source folder. So we'll create a new folder right here called source. Inside of it, we'll create a file called code.ts. All right, so just to be sure that everything's working and that we have RxJS integrated as we want it to be, we're going to put import all as rx from, and we'll say RxJS / observable. And then we'll simply console log Rx for now. All right, so now if we go back to our console, which by the way, you don't have to use a separate console. You could go to view integrated terminal and just run this following command, which is yarn run and start. So if I do that, everything should work here as expected, and then we'll be able to visit our localhost 8080, Control-Shift-I, and we'll see we have our object right here, which this means correctly that RxJS has been integrated and we're ready to rock. All right, so now we're going to actually begin learning about the exciting world of RxJS. And a great starting point would be to understand what a stream is and an observable. So a stream is simply just it's a concept. It's basically values or events, as they're called, that are emitted over time. So think of, for instance, a bunch of users chatting in a chat room. an individual filling out a form, through multiple different inputs. These are all values or events that are emitted over time, essentially. And their relation to an observable is actually what facilitates the stream. It provides you with a function and a means to both emit these values and also respond to them. All right, so I don't like a lot of conceptual stuff, so let's get a better understanding by actually doing. So I'm going to go back to our editor here, and we're going to make some adjustments to this. So first, you could just import everything, the entire kitchen sink here as we're doing, but I'd rather not do that because chances are you're never going to need to import this much stuff, and that would just be a waste. So what we're going to do is, what is it that we want to experiment with and learn? Well, an observable. So we're going to import observable from RxJS /observable, if I could spell it. There we go. And then we're going to create an observable. Very simple. We'll simply say var observable equals observable dot create method. All right, so I should warn you, there are multiple ways to create an observable, and the create method is just one method that you can do so to create one from scratch. All right, so this in and of itself is an observable, but this create method accepts a single argument, which is a subscribe function, and the subscribe function accepts what's called an observer argument. So adding to line 3 right here, we're going to pass in a function called subscribe, and then we pass in that observer. All right, and then we can open up that function within our squiggly braces, and to emit a value from this part right here, what we'll do, by the way, it's giving us this red squiggly line because of TypeScript we have enabled, so I just put any and that will go away. So to emit a value, we simply reference observer.next, and then we pass in whatever it is that we want to emit. So I'll just put in a string value of something like, hey guys. All right, so this in and of itself, if we were to save this, we wouldn't see anything in the console. We're not console logging. Nothing's really happening here. By the way, what we're going to do this here, we can make this less verbose if we simply get rid of function subscribe. All right, and then we convert this to an arrow function, which is what we're going to do throughout the rest of the duration of this course. But I did just want to show you the initial way there. All right, so next, if we want to grab the value, we have to define what's called an observer, right? So we haven't yet done that. So the way we can do that is we can say observable dot subscribe. All right, and then we're going to take whatever value is being emitted from next, so we can reference that as, I don't know, x of type any, our arrow function, and then we can just console log x for now. So now if we were to save this and go back and view the console, hey guys, we can see it right there. And this is ugly. And as I mentioned, I did want to output these type of results over here in the actual web page instead of using the console log. So what I'm going to do based on the written tutorial is just copy this little piece of code right here, this function. And we're going to use that function throughout this entire course essentially. So function add item, all we're doing is using vanilla JavaScript to create a list item element, and we're going to be passing in this value that we pass into it. So we can change this console log here to add item and then x. So now we save it, and there we go. We have something that's much better to look at. All right, so let's take a closer look at observers, and we can see right here, this here is in observers. Every time you subscribe, you are an observer and you create what's called a subscription. All right, so once again, these observers, they read values coming from the observable up here. So An observer is simply a set of callbacks that accept notifications coming from this observer, which include next, error, and complete. All right, so in our current example, we've only provided the next callback, which technically is right here. However, we can comma separate these to also include error and also complete. So let's make this a little bit more, I'd say demonstrative of the possibilities of observables and observers. So we have our observer next, hey guys, right here. Well, let's replicate that with Shift Alt and the down arrow key. If you're using Visual Studio Code, we'll say, how are you? All right, and then we're going to call observer.complete. And then we'll copy one of these and we'll say, this will not send. All right, next, before I describe what's happening here, let's go ahead and open this up. All right, so this is the next function that's handled right here. Let's also handle the other two functions, which would be error and complete. So we'll say error. We'll put add item error. And then we'll also say complete. We don't need to pass in anything here. We can just say add item and completed. So now at this point, if we save it, we'll see that it says, hey guys, how are you? Completed. However, we can see that because we completed the observer right here, this will not send. All right, great. So hopefully you have a pretty good idea of observables, at least at a very basic level. All right, so one thing, if we want to demonstrate error and how that works, is we can wrap our observable code here in try catch blocks. So try, and we'll put this here, catch, and then observer.error. That's how we can define an error, through the error method. And then just put ERR, and we want to catch that. All right. And that's how you would communicate error and make this fire right here if there was an error. We'll see if we save it, it still works. There is no error at all. Okay, so let's talk about canceling a subscription. So when you subscribe to an observable with an observer, you've created what's called a subscription, as I mentioned earlier, and you're given the ability to cancel that subscription in the event that you no longer need to receive the emitted values from the observer. So up here, we completed this observable, but what if we wanted just one of our subscribers? In our case, we only have one right here. What if we don't need to receive those emitted values anymore? All right, so let's set up our example here just so we can demonstrate this. So we're going to use right here a set interval function, and this will just repeat whatever is inside of here for whatever duration that we specify. Oops. All right, so what we'll do is I'll say observer.next. We'll change this to I am good. All right, so this is going to continually spit out I am good right here for every 2 seconds. Let's also get rid of this section right here, these 2 lines. And then we'll go ahead, let's rename this just so we can understand what it is a little bit better. Instead of rename it, I mean we're going to create a variable out of it so that we can reference it. So we'll call this var, and we'll just call this an observer. Then we can create a set timeout. And inside of here, we're going to call observer.unsubscribe in 6,001 milliseconds, or 6 seconds plus 1 millisecond. So if we save this, I am good, I am good, I am good, and then it's been unsubscribed and we will no longer receive any other emitted values. All right, so that's how you cancel a actual observer from receiving any further emitted values. All right, so also let's talk about creating multiple subscriptions. So you're able to create multiple subscriptions on the same observable very easily. So this could be useful if you have different areas of your user interface where you're using the same data, but you're displaying it potentially in a different way. So what we'll do is let's copy this right here. And we'll call this observer 2. And we don't need to have the error or complete callbacks there. And now, if we save this, you'll see we'll have duplicates of everything. All right, so also notice that we will still receive the I am good just from one of the observers, simply because the set timeout is only unsubscribing from the observer, the first observer up here. All right, so if we want to tie these two together, then we get into what are called child subscriptions. So what if we wanted to unsubscribe both of our subscriptions if the one has been unsubscribed? So to do that, all we have to do is call observer.add, and then we add observer 2. So if now we save this, all right, here it goes. Now none of them will emit any more values because it's been added. And you can also call subscription.remove and also remove a previously added observer if you need that functionality. Now, the next most important thing to understand once you understand the basics of what an observable is whether or not an observable is hot or cold. All right, so in the case of a cold observable, like the type that we've been working with so far right here, it's an observable whose producer, and by the way, a producer is this observer or the subscribe function right here because it produces or it emits these values or events. It's an observer whose producer is activated once a subscription, like down here, has been created. All right, so to better demonstrate this, let's go ahead and adjust our code. So we're going to leave all this the same up here. And down here, let's go ahead and get rid of just about all of this stuff. And inside of here, we'll make this, by the way, just 1 second. And we're going to create a second observer. So we'll say var observer 2 equals observable.subscribe. And then we will pass in, just as we have before, our next callback. So we'll call it x of type any, and we'll add item, and we'll say subscriber2, and then plus x, which is the emitted value here essentially. All right, so if we go ahead and save this, you'll see now that it has, hey guys, how are you? And then after 1 second, the subscriber receives, hey guys, how are you, etc. And this means that the observable is cold. And so an observable is hot when the producer is emitting values outside of the observable up here. So we can actually make this cold observable hot. And technically, this is more of what's called a warm approach or a warm observable with just a few changes. So if we import RxJS, add operator share, and we're going to learn about operators later on in the course, but we're doing it just for this relevant purpose here. If we add the share operator at the very end of our observable, and then we save this, we'll see it says, hey guys, how are you? I am good. Subscriber 2 starts receiving I am good and not the very initial values that were already emitted. And this would make it a warm or a hot observable. All right, so an example of a truly hot observable would be mouse movements, for instance, that are made by a user. So let's remove all of the current code with exception to the add item function. All right, so let's remove all of this. Let's get rid of our share operator here, and we're going to import from event from RxJS observable from event. All right, so we're going to create what's called a truly hot observable. So we're going to say var observable equals from event document and mouse move. This right here is technically an observable, and we're creating an observable from this from event function. So you can create observables through these creation operators, as they're referred to as. So then we're going to set timeout, and we're going to create a subscription or an observer on observable.subscribe. And the same thing as before with our next callback. We're going to add item right here. And then we're also going to give this a delay down here of 2000 seconds, or milliseconds rather. All right, so this is an example of what would be a truly hot observable, because if we save this, and for the first 2 seconds, we were already emitting values, and this observable was receiving those values already. But once we come over here, let me refresh. See, it's already receiving, and it's only going to start receiving from that point at which the observer was created. All right, so there are also, like I mentioned, other creation operators that we'll get into perhaps later on in the course. And you know, from event is simply one of probably about 10 different creation operators. You can create observables from ranges and timers, from a promise, just from a lot of stuff. So at this point, hopefully you should have a fairly strong and basic understanding of what streams are. And really a stream is just a concept. Observables, observers, and subscriptions. All right, so now let's talk about subjects. And you should really only get yourself to this point if you truly understand what an observable is. So if you're ending up on this from the internet, from this page, without watching the previous lesson where I discuss what observables are, then make sure you watch that first. Because a subject is just a different type of observable that has different capabilities. All right, so going back to the code that we've been working on, we're going to go ahead and just gut everything with exception to our add item function. And what I'm going to do is get rid of this, and we're going to import our subject from RxJS subject. All right, so let's create a subject. And by the way, a subject, in contrast to an observable, is simply an observer that's also able to emit values. So it's both an observable and an observer simultaneously. And this is unlike an observable, because as an observer that's subscribed to an observer, or rather an observable, it can only read values emitted from an observable. So if that sounds confusing and word salad, just hold your horses for a second. We're going to create a subject, new subject. All right, that's how easy it is to create a subject. And now we have to subscribe to it just as we would a regular observable. So think of this just as an observable. All right, so what we'll do is subject.subscribe. And we have our 3 different functions here. So we can say our data, add item, observer 1, and we'll pass in the data. And then we can have our error of add item and our complete callback item observer 1 completed. All right. Now, if we save this project, nothing's going to happen next because we have to use that next method to start emitting values from the observer. So now we can say subject.next, the first thing has been sent. Now, we weren't able to do this before, like in the previous lesson when we were talking about just pure observables. The actual subscriptions or the observers or subscribers can't actually emit values like we're doing right here. So if we save this and go back, observer 1, the first thing has been sent. All right, so now that's simple enough, but let's make it more interesting by defining another observer and then pushing some more values. All right, so underneath the first thing has been sent, let's create a second observer. So var, this time we'll create a variable out of it. So observer2 subject.subscribe, and we'll say data, same thing over here, add item, and we'll say observer2 and plus data. All right, and then let's go ahead and reference our subject and make 2 more calls. So the second thing has been sent, and we'll Shift Alt and down arrow key that, and then also a third thing has been sent. Let's save that, and this is the result that we get. So we can see that the second observer doesn't receive the first thing has been sent, but only the values that came after it was created. So it doesn't receive this simply because this hasn't yet been created. So it's created, then it receives both of these values down here. So the subject observers also have the following methods, which are add, remove, and unsubscribe. So let's try unsubscribing the second observer and sending a value after it, and this will demonstrate, what it takes to unsubscribe and what happens as a result. So what we'll do is we'll reference our observer2 right here, and we'll say we don't need that one anymore to subscribe. So we'll say observer2.unsubscribe, and then let's push one more event, and we'll just say a final thing has been sent. All right, so if we save this and we go back, we'll see that the observer2 receives the 2 values that were emitted right here and here. And then observer2 is unsubscribed, and observer1 will still receive all of the events that are coming from the subject itself. So now that you understand what a subject is, let's talk about the variations of subject. So there's 3 different variations, and the first one is called the behavior subject, and they're all very similar, but they offer different capabilities. So going back here, basically a behavior subject is a special type of subject whose only difference is that it will emit the last value upon a new observer's subscription. So what does that mean? All right, so for instance, in the above example that we have here of a regular subject, when observer2 subscribed, and we can look at this in the result, it only received the value that was emitted after it, or the values, rather plural, that were submitted after it, as we could see. In the case of a behavior subject, this observer2 will receive the last or the previous value that was emitted from the behavior subject. So in this case, it would have received, the very first thing it would have received was right here, the first thing that has been sent. So let's better demonstrate this so you can get a better grip of what exactly is happening here. We're going to change subject simply to behavior subject, and we're going to import it from behavior subject. And then on line 3, instead of a new subject, this is a behavior subject right here. All right, so we also have to pass in the first argument right here. We'll just say first because it needs an initial argument here. So what we want to do then to better demonstrate what's happening just after this very first event that's emitted, we're going to say subject.next. Observer2 is about to subscribe. All right, so now let's go ahead and save this. And we're going to see in the browser, we have our observer 1 and 3 instances of this where it has those first 3 pushes. So it has the very first value up here, and then the first thing has been sent. Observer 2 is about to subscribe. Then we can see observer 2 right here, and this is the first time we see it, and it gets the last event that was emitted from the behavior subject. So right here, observer 2 is about to subscribe. Observer 2 receives that. In the case of a subject, you simply wouldn't get that previous value. And that really is one of the only differences between behavior subject and a subject itself. So now let's talk about the second type of subject, and that's called a replay subject. All right, so it's like behavior subject, except it allows you to specify a buffer or number of emitted values to dispatch to observers. So behavior subject only dispatches the last emitted value, as we can see here, and replay subject allows you to dispatch any designated number of values. So let's try to go ahead and give this a try in our project. So we're going to change this here from behavior to replay. All right, same old stuff right here. And then in this first parameter, we can specify the number of events or values to dispatch to new observers. So we'll just say 2. All right, so then let's once again make adjustments to our next calls. All right, so we'll just say the first thing has been sent. Let's replicate that. And we're going to change this to another thing has been sent. And this is just to give us 3, just to show that it will only return the last 2 to the new subscriber. So let's save that. All right, so let's look for observer 2. We can see the very first thing it receives is another thing has been sent, and not the first thing has been sent, and not the observer 2. All right, so hopefully you're understanding the differences between subject, behavior subject, and replay subject so far. They're all very similar, and the most flexibility so far to this point is basically in replay subject, where you can specify any X amount of events that a new observer or a new subscription would see. Okay. All right, so now let's go ahead and also talk about another really cool thing that a replay subject is able to do. All right, it accepts an optional second argument up here, and upon creation, which is referred to as the window time, and it's defined in milliseconds. So it allows you to define a maximum number of events to return in the first argument, as we've already done, and then the second argument is the time in milliseconds. So sounds confusing. So to demonstrate this, let's make a number of changes here. We're going to change, we'll say we want it to return a maximum number of 30 events within a 200 millisecond buffer time here. All right, so then we're going to just make an adjustment right down here. We're going to get rid of these next things right here. So we're going to say var I = 1, and then var int. We're going to set interval, if I can type, and we're going to say subject.next. So we're going to push a value on an interval, and the value that we're going to push is going to be that I, and we're going to increment it every 100 milliseconds. And then we're going to take our observer 2 that's created right here, and we're going to wrap it in a set timeout. And we'll make this timeout 500 milliseconds. All right, so now if we go ahead and let's go ahead and get rid of that unsubscription right there. And we can go ahead and get rid of everything else down here as well. Now if we go ahead and save this, all right, so we can see that in the browser, we have our observer of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 that the observer 1 receives. Then after 500 milliseconds, the observer 2 is created, and observer 2 will only receive 4 and 5. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. We can go ahead and change, for instance, the window time on line 3 from 200 to 500. And in this case, we'll see that observer 2, once it's created right here, receives all of them. All right. Now, the final type of subject that we're going to discuss is called the async subject. And this is the last subject variation, and it's perhaps the most simple to understand. So async subject only emits the very last value and will only do so once the complete method has been called upon the subject. So using the example from the above, let's just make some slight adjustments. We're going to import async subject. All right, and we can get rid of this. We don't need any arguments here. And we're going to simply come down here, and in our set timeout, we're going to call, and in order for async subject to work, we have to call subject.complete. So now let's save that. And what has happened? Well, we can see that only the very last value will be sent to each of the observers. And they will only be sent, for instance, if we remove that, nothing will happen. They only get sent once complete has been called upon the subject. All right, so for the final section, we're going to discuss operators. And in RxJS, operators are perhaps what might be used most outside of observables and in and of themselves. All right, so there's over 100 plus, I don't know, I think it's like something like 120 different operators to use, and it would take forever to go through all of them. So the goal of this specific tutorial is to not go over every single one of them, but to help you understand how to read the official documentation and how to read what are called the marble diagrams so that you can have confidence going forward. So we still are going to use several of these operators so that you can, get some muscle memory and understand how they're used in relation to subjects and observables. All right, so what I want to do first is spend a little bit of time just discussing what an actual operator is. All right, so they're simply methods that you can use on observables and subjects. And remember, subjects are just special types of observables that allow you to change the original observable in some manner and return a new observable. So these operators, they don't change the existing observable. They simply modify it and return a new one. So operators like this are known as pure functions, which are functions like in JavaScript that they don't modify the variables outside of its scope. All right, so the only other two things to understand here in the context of operators are the static operators and then the instance operators. So the instance operators right here, these are methods on observable instances, and these account for the large majority of RxJS operators. Then you also have static operators, and these operators are usually used to create observables, and you'll find these mainly under the creation operators. All right. Next, I really want to show this part. The official documentation, when it comes to these operators, will use what is called a marble diagram right here. All right, so this here is just an excerpt from the official documentation that describes what's happening with a marble diagram. And so at the top here, this represents the original observable, this whole portion right here. This arrow is time that's flowing from left to right. And these here are events, or the values that are emitted from the observables right here. And then this vertical line represents the complete notification. and we've already discussed and demonstrated how you can complete an observable. And here in the middle is the actual operator. All right, so we're going to be passing the original observable to some type of operator, and it could be multiple operators, not just one. And then this shows the output, like what happened to these events based on whatever happened to this, whichever type of operator was passed into. All right, so they're using an example called multiply by 10. So, 4 becomes 40, 6 becomes 60. And then the X represents an error emitted by the output observable. So they're just kind of throwing the kitchen sink at you. You're not going to see all this type of stuff with all of these marble diagrams. So it's really important, to understand. And we're going to take a look at a few examples and actually integrate them into code here going forward. Okay, so let's talk about using an operator. So the official documentation has a section where you can see categories of operators. Let me try to find it. I just kind of lost the page. There we go. Categories of operators. So like I said, there's a ton. There's creation, there's transformation operators, there's filtering, combination, multicasting, arrow handling, utility, conditional, Boolean, and mathematical and aggregate. So just a ton that are here. And so depending on what you want to do with the incoming observable, you would choose an operator from one of these categories. So let's say, for instance, that we wanted to merge two separate observables into one. Well, you would use what's called the merge operator. And so that's all about combining two observables, and it falls under the combination category in the documentation. I got rid of that. I shouldn't have done that, but let me come back here. We'll find it real quickly just so I can show you the marble diagram, and then we'll actually work with it in the code. So we'll have our, let's see, our combination. There we go, right here. And we'll find merge. And this is what the official documentation looks like. It gives you a description, and then it shows you that marble diagram. So here, when you have two arrows, it's representing two different observables. So the events coming from observable 1 are A, B, and C. Observable 2 would be D, E, and F. Now, if you pass it through a merge operator, then it becomes and it outputs a single observable right here that has all of these values combined. So let's actually do that. And then, of course, it does give you, more information as needed. Okay, so to do that, let's go ahead and we're going to import just an observable. And let's create an observable right here. All right, so it takes in an observer, arrow function, and we'll say observer next to emit a value of hey guys. We're going to go back to the original demonstration here. We're going to say observable 2. All right, and we'll say observer next would be something like how is it going? By the way, you don't have to use this create operator for creating an observable. You could use one of the other creation operators, which we'll do shortly. You could use from a lot of different ones. There's like 10 or 11. All right, so this one will be how's it going? This is observable 2. What if we wanted to merge these two together? Let's go ahead and, by the way, get rid of all of this stuff right here. And let's create a new observable for our new obs for observable. And then we simply call, and by the way, before we can call merge, we have to import RxJS observable merge. And we'll say merge, and then simply the observables that we want to merge. So observable and observable 2. And by the way, I screwed that up. I need to import merge from there. There we go. And then finally, we have to subscribe to this new observable right here. So this would be new obs.subscribe, x of type any, TypeScript stuff there. And we'll say add item x. All right, so we have two different values. Hey guys, how is it going? Two different observables. We're going to merge them, and then we subscribe to them. So let's save that. And there we go. Our single observable that has been merged now takes and emits both of these values here. All right, so let's get more practice just by working with these operators so we can help with muscle memory. So a common operator that's used a lot is the map operator, and you're probably familiar with it if you've used Angular in any degree. So let's take a look at that real quick in terms of the marble diagram. So this map operator, this is the marble diagram for it. So we have a single observable up here with the values or the events of 1, 2, and 3. And then you pass in the map operator and you pass in whatever events are coming from it, being x, and then you transform it in some manner. And so in this particular case, they're going to multiply it by 10. So 1 becomes 10, 20, and 30. So we could do a lot of different things. So we could append a string to the end of the events, or make all of the results capital, or just do anything, you know, under the sun. So basically it's a transformation type of operator. So let's go ahead and actually get experience with just making a real simple adjustment here. So we're going to put in map, and then we're going to call observable.create. And I wanted to do this to show you a less verbose way if you don't necessarily need to create variables out of these. So get rid of this, and right here, let's get rid of all of that stuff. We can say .map. Actually, we'll come down .map. And then we'll transform the value of which we know is going to be hey guys, and we'll just call a JavaScript function of to uppercase. So we're transforming it in some way, and then we can subscribe to it. And add item X. Oh, and I forgot we need to adjust that slightly. This is not the correct location. It is add and then operator map. Sorry about that. Now if we go back, there we go. It's transformed it in some way, and in our case, it's just to make it uppercase. So again, very, very simple stuff to understand these operators. Let's try another one called pluck. And so let's say your observable emits an array of objects with multiple properties, but you only need a single property. So you can pluck that property from the original observable and return a new observable with just that property. So this is what the marble diagram looks like for that. Coming down here, pluck. All right, so we have an object with a property name of 1, with a value of 1. And also here, same thing. These are all called V. You want to pluck just V. Well, here we go. We have the values that are returned are 1, 2, and 3. So let's go ahead and try that by adjusting our code a bit more. So this time, instead of just creating an observable from observable, let's use one of the other creation operators we haven't used. So you can create an observable using what's called from. And this is a creation operator. So from. And then we're going to include pluck instead of add, or map rather. And then let's go ahead and get rid of all this. And we're going to say from, and we're going to pass in an array of objects. So the first will be first, we'll name the property first. So first name would be Gary, last would be Simon, age 34. I'm getting old. And then I'll use Shift, Alt, and down twice. And I'll just change these two properties here. So Jane and John. I'm going to leave the other ones the same. I don't feel like adjusting those. So then we can use the pluck operator on this. So we'll say pluck first, being the name of the property that's from this array of objects. So we're just going to take that one, and then we're going to subscribe to this newly transformed observable. So the original observable is still here, but this right here will return a new observable that we're going to subscribe to. So x_any, you know the drill at this point. And we'll say add item x. So now it's only going to return Gary, Jane, and John, the values from the first property. All right, let's try one more. And so we're going to try one called skip until. And this is an operator that's a little bit more complex than the previous examples, but it's the last one we're going to try. And it allows you to start emitting events from one observable based on when a second observable begins emitting events. So let's try updating our code from here. So we're just going to use an observable from observable. And let's replicate this 2 more times. The second observable, let's go ahead and use a subject this time. And again, it's an observable. It's just a special type of observable. And then we're also going to import interval. And you'll see how this comes into play. All right, and then we're going to import the operator we want to use, skip until. All right, so now let's go ahead. I'm going to gut everything here. And we're going to say observable 1 is observable, and this is one that's going to be created just from the create operator. Data is type any. And inside of here, var I equals 1. And then we're going to say set interval data.next I++. So it's just going to start emitting these events, which are simply going to be integers that increase by 1. And they will do that every 1 second. All right, so that's the first observable. Now let's go ahead and create a subject observer, or observable rather. So var observable2 equals new subject. And then we're going to create this subject after a certain amount of time. So set timeout. And we'll say observable2. And we're not going to create it, rather, I meant we're going to emit a value after 3 seconds. So observable2, and because if you remember, subjects can they can act as observers in that they can produce. So we can put next, hey, and I'll do that in 3 seconds. And then we're going to use our skip until. So we're going to create a new observable from observable1.skip until observable2 begins emitting its first value. All right, so then we can subscribe to new observable. So we'll say subscribe x_any. I keep on doing that. I put an underline, or an underscore rather. And then we'll put add item x. All right, so the important thing to note here is that observable2 does get created at the same time, but it doesn't actually emit a value. So it has to emit a value in order for observable1 to actually start being displayed. And you'll see that here. So if we save it, we go through 3 seconds, and then it starts producing values. And it will only produce a value until this right here gets met, that this subject starts producing values. So if we change this to 5 seconds, and you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there it goes. It starts emitting those values. So this, of course, is just one of many operators that you can use that dramatically allow you to control how your observables and how you respond to the events and values that the observables are emitting over time. All right, so hopefully you found that crash course into RxJS useful, because now going forward, especially on my own channel, we're going to be expanding and be covering RxJS in relation to Angular, and I'm also going to be creating actual practical example projects using what we've learned with these observables and the subjects and operators. All right, so as always, if you enjoyed it, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, check out CourseSetter.com, and I'll see you soon.